from DreamWorks. Bonnie is known for critically and commercially acclaimed animated hits and award-winning dramas. She's currently the co-president of feature animation for DreamWorks Animation. She produced Oscar-nominated blockbuster How to Train Your Dragon and the Golden Globe-winning sequel How to Train Your Dragon 2. Her films span from the pioneering Toy Story to the Oscar-winning Dances with Wolves. From family favorites Addams Family and Over the Hedge to the Oscar-nominated The Last Station. Along the way, she's worked with many of the industry's most creative directors. We're very lucky to have Bonnie here with us today to explore her expansive career and the creative vision of DreamWorks. Here to lead the conversation is Justin Johnson from the BFI, who programs animation and live-action films for the younger audiences at BFI South Bank and the London Film Festival. So I'll turn it over to you, Justin.
Hi. I might repeat slightly a few things that Lynn said, but if it's worth saying once, it's definitely worth saying again. First of all, I should just say, from our point of view, a big thank you to Lynn and Meryl, Elizabeth, Jen and Nick from the TIFF Kids team, who have put together a really amazing public industry programme, and really thrilled to be here. So a big thank you to them. I think we should just give them a round of applause. So, last week at the BFI in London, we hosted an event with the Polish filmmaker Agnieszka Holland, who found huge success in her own country and has gone on to make a number of English language films as well, such as The Secret Garden and Washington Square. And she's also directed a number of episodes of really high-quality television shows, such as Treme, House of Cards and The Killing. And at the event that we held with her last week in London, she talked about cinema as being a boys' club, run by male decision-makers reluctant to entrust women with big-budget films. And her voice is one of many talented women around the world who are frustrated by the male domination within the big studios in terms of creative and acting roles. DreamWorks Animation Studios is a company that I think you could argue has bucked the trend in this respect, with Brenda Chapman in the early days of the studio directing Prince of Egypt, and Jennifer Yu Nelson directing Kung Fu Panda 2 and 3 very recently. These are huge budget productions in the hands of talented women. What's more, last year, in a major restructure at the top of the company, Jeffrey Katzenberg announced a new creative post. 2 presidents in charge of overseeing feature films for the studio, both successful producers in their own right. Miro Soria, the producer of the Madagascar films, and Bonnie Arnold, producer of Toy Story, Tarzan, Over the Hedge, How to Train Your Dragons 1 and 2. And, of course, 3 coming up in 2018. Bonnie has worked successfully in the business, initially on live-action projects and more recently on a number of major animation titles. Her CV reads like a list of some of the best movies of the last 30 years and includes, as we just heard a moment ago, Dances with Wolves, The Addams Family, The Mosquito Coast, Revenge, The Last of the Mohicans and The Last Station, not to mention the animation titles I've already said. So today, and in a moment, I'm going to talk to Bonnie about the creative vision and processes that form storytelling and character development in DreamWorks Animation's hugely successful family films. What does the future of feature animation look like? And what are the key challenges of the present-day market? We'll also be exploring what it means to be a woman in what is perceived by many to be a very male-orientated industry, and what, if anything, should be done to widen the intake for women generally. So before I bring up Bonnie on the stage, we're just going to play a very short introduction, just a little fun sort of sizzle piece about Bonnie's career to date. So let's roll the first clip, please. the incredibly talented Bonnie Arnold. So, Bonnie, thanks so much for being here. I know you've kind of flown over especially to be here for this event, and I think that's really appreciated.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you, everyone at the Film Festival, for having me.
So, I think there's always a tendency to try and pigeonhole people in terms of animation people and live action people, and one of the really good things that clip kind of demonstrates is the fact that you've successfully worked over both fields, and even as recently as Last Station, when you were still working at DreamWorks. So, bearing in mind your upbringing, which was in Atlanta, Georgia, which is not known, or certainly at that time wasn't known for its kind of film connections, how did you get into the film industry?
Well, I always was a big film fan. I loved movies from the time I was a little kid. My mom took me as her movie buddy to see all kinds of movies from the time I was really young. But when I was growing up, a zillion years ago, it doesn't feel like there was a film school in every corner. So honestly, there wasn't even Entertainment Tonight. So I had really no idea that you could, living where I lived, that you really could pursue that as a career. I ended up going to school in journalism, but really loved the movies. But around the time I was sort of getting out of college, or just prior to that, really, Burt Reynolds, who was actually one of the biggest movie stars in the world at that time, was doing a lot of his films, his big films, shooting them in Georgia, like the Deliverance and the Smokey and the Bandit movies and Cannonball Run and those types of films. And so Georgia had a small but sort of thriving film community. And by happenstance, I really connected with the folks that were running the film commission there and kind of put myself forward to start working kind of just any old job that I could do to get myself in with the film business in Georgia. So that was really live action, and that's how I started. And I did a little bit of everything. I worked on commercials. They would do TV shows, and some features would come there to film because of the right to work state at the time. It was very cheap to film there. So really just kind of started working my way up, and came to realize I wanted to be a producer. I saw that what the producer did, and I thought, I can do that.
But you were doing real heavy duty kind of man work at the time.
Well, it definitely, it was all guys for sure. And I said, I was talking to some women the other day in Los Angeles as a part of a speech I did for the producers, some women in the Producers Guild that I am on the board there, of. And I said, I started by doing guy jobs. I mean, I drove the van, and I, schlepped coolers all over the place. And on a job that I actually met Kevin Costner, which resulted in me getting hired by him to work with him on Dances with Wolves. The first job I had to do, we were working on a movie called Revenge that Tony Scott directed. And the producers told me, well, we need you to fly with Kevin to the location in Mexico. And I said, well, what am I supposed to be doing? And he said, well, you're sort of his bodyguard. And I said, well, Kevin is 6'2", and I'm 5'1". What am I going to do? How am I going to do that job? But I think part of it, I've come to find out, it was really like fending off all these women that were like throwing themselves at him as we were going from airport to airport on our way from Los Angeles to somewhere in the middle of nowhere in Mexico. But I did a good job, and ended up working with Kevin after that on his next film. But I just did literally not turn down any job that was sort of asked of me, and slowly but surely kind of made my way from Atlanta to Hollywood to work in film, and eventually segued from live action to animation.
And Dance with Wolves, you were associate producer on.
Yes.
And that was, everybody thinks of it now as being the huge box office success that it was and the Oscars it won, but it was a very problematic production, and it was a very, very low budget, wasn't it?
Well, nobody wanted to give. No, I don't remember the exact number of years, but I don't think anybody had done a Western like that in quite a number of years. It had sort of fallen out of favor, from maybe, I want to say maybe the late 60s or even the early 70s. This was like, some of these things, I can't remember all the titles, but they just hadn't done one in a while, and nobody wanted to give Kevin a lot of money to do it. They raised most of the money from foreign film financing, and it wasn't very much money. I think our budget was $17 million, which at the time was not a lot of money to make that type of sprawling Western. So it was tough. We were there in South Dakota for 6 months, a little over 6 months, I was one of the first ones there and the last ones to leave, and for through every type of weather, through everything that could happen did happen, and but we managed to do it. And I do remember looking at the first film dailies. That's when all the movies were shot on film. Everybody remembers that. And we had to test. You tested the film stock before you started shooting, and we did like a makeup and hair and wardrobe test that we showed and then we looked at in dailies at night at the end of the day. And when I saw it, I just knew people were going to be blown away by it, honestly, because no one had ever really, at least, and I loved Westerns, had portrayed the Native American Indian people in that way before, in such a interesting, different type of light. So it was an interesting project for me.
And we take it very much for granted now that all kind of sort of CG animation is kind of shiny and latest technology, and it's become, 2D animation, apart from perhaps France and Japan and certain countries now, is very much sort of very retro in a lot of people's opinions. So Toy Story at the time was completely revolutionary, and can you just tell us a little bit about sort of working on that project and actually getting the producer credit as well? That's your first producer credit.
Yes, that was my first full producer credit, but at the time I had just finished working on the Addams Family film, and that movie was really one of the last big really effects films that had no CG in it at all. It had all the traditional type of effects work, everything from puppets to you name it, from the Cousin It and Thing and all the parts of the movie, but nothing was done in CG. At the same time, they were just starting to talk about Forrest Gump, getting ready to do that, which would actually, Forrest Gump and I think Jurassic Park, which would actually have a number of real CG, computer-generated images for their effects work. And when I was introduced to the folks at Disney through a mutual friend, and really it wasn't to do an animated film, it was really to do something in their, I came up through really line producing, and it was to be a producer on a different project there. But in the process of meeting, someone asked me if I was interested in meeting the head of feature animation at Disney. And I thought, well, I really don't know. I loved animation as a kid, but I knew nothing about producing animation. But I always, my mom always said, go meet everybody. What does it hurt? I said, okay, I'll go meet the guy. And we talked, and he said, well, we have this project that is going to be done by this company up in Northern California, and it's going to be all computer animated. And we were talking, and we're something like, and I'm not getting the exact correct statistic, but Jurassic Park or Forrest Gump would have maybe like 70 CG effect shots, which at that time, again, nobody had done any CG effects in movies. Toy Story really was an all CG movie, every shot. So we were doing 1,500 effect shots, basically. But Disney, had Pixar really, it was a company they were going to work with called Pixar. They had the technology. Disney knew about animation. And everybody just went into it thinking, okay, we'll figure it out as we go. And I asked him, well, what kind of budget do you have for that? And he said, well, $17 million. I said, oh, I just did a movie for $17 million. That's very easy. It was Dances with Wolves, and I thought, I didn't even know better. But I think the great thing about taking on the challenge of that was that just what I was saying is, even though everybody had their specialty, no one had ever produced an all CG film before. So every day it was, I kind of liken it to just having a big, dirt path there, and we had a little flagstone, and each day we'd put down a flagstone. This is the path we're going to take, and we all moved on that flagstone. And the next day we'd all regroup and say, what are we going to do today? How are we going to take the next step, and sort of paving the way to getting this movie done. But at first because my background had been that we said we need Disney's going to finance the movie, and we need somebody, a person that can work with both Disney and Pixar to oversee the money and the production and how it will go. And he said, are you interested? And I said, well, maybe, but I said I want to be the producer. And he said we were looking for really more of an associate producer, and I said, well, I've already done that. So I was finishing a movie at Columbia Pictures for another film at the time, and that movie, the Pixar movie, did not have a green light yet. And I said, well, you guys think about it and I'll think about it. So sure enough, 6 months later, Peter Schneider, who was running Disney Feature Animation, called me back and said, look, we're going to move forward on that movie that I told you about. I'd like you to meet the folks that are the creative folks that are involved in it and have you reconsider it. And I said, well, I'll only reconsider it if I can be the producer. So, who knows? So put it out there sometimes. And anyway, we all met, and I met John Lasseter and ended up spending some time talking with him and realized that I actually had something to offer the production, that no one of their team had really produced anything longer than a commercial, which was, a couple of minutes or less. And no one had ever produced, anything feature length. And it's just a different type of race. It's like a sprint versus a marathon. And I said, well, there's stuff here that I know that I feel like I can, that I can bring to the party. I went up there and I met everyone. And sure enough, they said, well, you're the person that we think we can agree on, Pixar and Disney. And, what will it take to get you to do this? And I said, well, I want to be the producer. So anyway, they offered me the producer job on that.
And the creation of Pixar and the making of Toy Story, it's almost become like sort of part of history now, like filmmaking history. And we've got very big personalities. You've got John Lasseter, you've got Ed Catmull, you've got Steve Jobs kind of jumping in and out as well. I mean, how did they, I know that you met with John and they kind of accepted you, but really how did they respond to somebody coming in from outside and a woman at that?
I have to say, coming along, at that point, I never thought of it as a woman thing, really. I just think that, I had a certain skill set. And I do think they needed somebody who was, really understood, really just was in there to sort of help them accomplish their goal. And it was a very under-the-radar type of production, almost all along. I think for a while there, we didn't even know what we had, that we were just watching it internally. And in the animation process, we have a process called story reel, where we storyboard and story reel, where we sketch out all the film, all the script and, little drawings, and we film that and we watch it multiple times before we spend the money to do the animation. And we had bumps and we had fits and starts along the way, but I remember distinctly, it wasn't until we invited actually Burger King, who Disney was in partnership with at that time, to do their, fast food partnership, like sometimes they do McDonald's, Burger King, some of the different whatever. And the Burger King executives came in up to Pixar where we were, and they saw it, and they were just blown away. And I think that was really the first time that someone from the outside had actually seen some footage from the movie. And it was only then that we started to realize, wow, this is something. Again, sometimes we're so close to it that we didn't even know exactly what we had going. So it was an interesting process, actually.
And somehow I think people have this tendency just to sort of think about these movies as being, they're computer made somehow. But actually, I mean, you've said, I think, on numerous occasions before, it's computers don't make these movies, people do. And actually, they all have to be managed. And actually, the other thing in terms of live action and animation is that the thing that they both have in common is you still have to get the story right. Whatever happens, if you haven't got a good story at the base of it, and that's definitely the case with Toy Story, isn't it?
Well, I think, too, that was a thing that even, when I first started working at Pixar, Jeffrey Katzenberg, who is my current boss, was running the film division of Disney. And he, when he started working at Disney, he quickly became he just studied everything that Walt Disney had written about storytelling, because really they were the preeminent, leader of feature animated, storytelling. And he, took that on himself, that it was story, story, story. The most important thing was telling the story, telling a good story, and a story that could sustain over, 80 or 90 minutes. So that was, that was really the most important piece of it. And I think for me, what I enjoy so much is really working with the artists, whether it be, we have what we call story artists. They're the ones that do all the, the sketch out and figure out all the action and business for what the, translation of the script to the visuals going to be, and the animators who are really, the performances in animation come from two places. They come from the voice actors who do the voice performance, and then they come from the animator who actually gives physical life and really gives a physicality to the performance of the animated characters. So all these people are artists, and really my job as a producer is to, on any given day, to kind of help, oversee what they're doing and make sure everybody's, going down the same path.
Well, you've chosen a clip from Toy Story, which we're going to play in a moment. Is there anything you want to say about it before we watch it, or should we just run it?
I don't know. It is, when we were talking, it is kind. Listen, a lot about Toy Story brings back a lot of great memories, and but it's probably my favorite clip in the movie in some ways. So this is the one I picked to share.
Okay, let's watch that. So, when you're making a film like Toy Story, or you're making even the films now, I mean, the technology is being pushed all the time. And one thing that really strikes me is that with every film, whether with all the DreamWorks films and Dragons in particular, but obviously at this time it was Toy Story, there are loads of things that you're trying to create that have never been done before on screen. And are there points where you just have to say we just can't do that anymore because the budget won't allow? Or I mean, how are you in terms of how do you motivate and keep pushing people to keep creating while at the same time pushing the technology in tandem?
Well, for us, the technology is really the tool, and I think that on any given day, it's about really managing your resources, whether that be your finances or how many people you have to work with or how much money you have to manage, how much to get you to that goal. And, each day is a challenge. And I think the great news is the artists are always sort of pushing themselves. And but they also understand, I think, the kind of discipline of having to do it within what we call within a little bit of a box. How are we going to accomplish this and get the best result and tell the story? And for the artists, we're probably the most picky to ourselves. But there's a lot, the audience is a little bit more forgiving than sometimes we even allow that. But that's what makes it fun. I mean, listen, the artists will. I manage them and I help them to get to where they need to go in terms of letting them know what the parameters are. But they're so amazing at coming back and telling you how they can accomplish the goal if you're very clear with them. And I think in each of the films that I've been a part of in this way, especially ones that are challenging technically, and all these the people that work in this business, they continue to amaze me. Is that how it always comes back better than what you pitched to them or what you thought it might you wanted it to be. They'll always come back with it better. So that's what gives me a lot of joy in working with them, is letting them work out the challenge and come back to you and tell you how they're going to do it.
And can you tell us a little bit about the path to Tarzan at Disney and then the initial kind of step over to DreamWorks?
Well, after Toy Story, I honestly, I enjoyed the process amazingly, but honestly, my vision for myself really was to, the folks at Pixar asked me if I wanted to stay up there and continue to work with them. And maybe that was short-sighted at the time, but honestly, as being a little girl in Georgia and wanted to be in Hollywood, that's where I really saw myself and really wanted to be. I loved living in Northern California, and it was great, but I really wanted to be a producer in Hollywood. That was my goal. So in Disney, I actually was honestly, I was a Disney employee on that show, so they wanted me to come back, and a project they were, and I wasn't even sure I really wanted to stay with animation at that point. I kind of missed live action and that life and that world and being in Los Angeles. So I came back to Los Angeles, but Disney started talking to me about a project they wanted to do, Tarzan. And I have to say, it was just so appealing. I found it very difficult to say no to that. They wanted to do an animated version of Tarzan. Largely, it was one of my favorite movies I had watched with my dad growing up. I watched all the Johnny Weissmuller Tarzan movies. I was a huge fan of the movies. We were going to be dealing with the Edgar Rice Burroughs, the grandson of Edgar Rice Burroughs, and just all that Hollywood history, and I don't know, something about it seemed very appealing. And sort of the icing on the cake was they were already talking with Phil Collins about doing the music for the movie. And I have to say, I wasn't the greatest Phil Collins fan, but I loved his music. And what was amazing about that film is this is right before I had started. I met the two directors, Kevin Lima and Chris Buck, and I really felt like I could be a real partner to them. And they had sent just a rough outline, I don't even think it was a finished script of what the Tarzan story would be about. And Phil Collins sent back like 6 songs that he wrote immediately. I shouldn't say immediately, but in pretty rapid fashion. 6 tentpole songs that would sort of be, placed in the movie and those songs became the tentpoles for the storytelling of the movie. And they changed a little bit. We adjusted a few lyrics to match really some of the action in the movie, but basically they became the tentpoles. And that was just, I'm not a musician in any way, shape, or form, but I completely appreciate good movie music. And that whole experience and the combination of a story and a character that I loved for a long time, along with the directors who I felt very much in sync with, and felt like I could contribute to that creatively with Phil Collins made me want to come, stay at Disney and do that. And it was in 2D, 2D. There were some 3D elements about it. But having not come up through traditional 2D animation, it was a great learning experience for me in terms of understanding, traditional 2D animation. And, really was one of the last ones that they did at Disney, quite like that.
Obviously, Jeffrey Katzenberg, who is a big, larger-than-life character, very well known during his time at Disney, and obviously The Lion King, and a huge number of successes under his belt. Then becomes the competition and creates DreamWorks with Geffen and Spielberg.
Well, he did that right. Actually, interestingly, he actually left about a year before we finished Toy Story. And he left at a time, there was some political struggles at Disney. A lot of people know that story of him and Michael Eisner and why, and he left. But actually, Toy Story was going through some bumpy stuff then in terms of the films. We one step forward, not so much technically, but just even creatively, trying to really nail the story and get it right. And even though we knew it was going to be something special, I have to say that in the last year after Jeffrey left, no relation to it really, that the movie kind of landed and took off. And so I remember having a conversation with Jeffrey about a month or two before the movie actually was released, which was again then a year after he had left. And I said, well, the movie has gotten so much better. And I know he thought I was talking from, somebody who, it was my baby at that point. But honestly, when he saw it, he called me and said, I can't believe how much, how the movie turned out in the end. But he actually wanted me to come to DreamWorks from the beginning. And there was another project that he was trying to get off the ground at DreamWorks. And honestly, for me as a producer, it was really about the movie. And at that time, I chose Tarzan. I wanted to stay at Disney and do Tarzan, mainly, again, for all those reasons that I felt like when you commit to something for 4 years of your life and you put a lot of, blood, sweat, and tears into the whole thing, Tarzan was just more appealing. So after that, Jeffrey asked me again, after we finished Tarzan, Jeffrey asked me again to come to DreamWorks. And by that time, I thought, well, I don't know if I could turn him down again. And
he made you an offer you couldn't refuse.
Absolutely.
There's something very special about the campus at DreamWorks. It's very green, and there's lots of water features everywhere, and everything seems to be based around kind of keeping everybody who works there kind of happy in terms of there's classes and there's free food, there's everything, and I mean that presumably comes out of the ethos that if you kind of keep your staff happy, they're going to produce good work. And can you just talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think also we spend so much time there, honestly, and these movies definitely everybody works really hard over a long period. We're not on a movie location per se, and if you go into some of these, sometimes into some of these, places, especially now where they're working on, computer animated films, and I feel like some of the buildings look like dentist's office, and you can imagine spending 12 and 15 hours a day in these little rooms and a dark room and a computer. So you still have to spend the time in the dark room because some of these monitors have to be color correct and all these different reasons that you do need to spend the time in the dark room. We feel like when you go outside of your office at DreamWorks, it's beautiful and it's there's things to do, and you can take a break from sitting at your computer and play a game of ping pong, or sit by the we have a koi pond and in the back, and you can sit there and kind of meditate for a moment and collect your thoughts, and then go back and work a little harder. And we have snacks and just a a way to make everybody feel like they have they can do what they have to do, take breaks, and then also exchange ideas with their friends. We have a lot of open areas where we can, the different film. At any one time, we have 5 or 6 movies at different phases of production going at once. And so a lot of the artists, I guess what you read in the press and you say, DreamWorks is competitive with Pixar, is competitive with Disney and Illumination and that. But honestly, the film community, especially the one in Los Angeles, is quite small. And a lot of us have worked together at different places. I've worked at, Disney, Pixar, and DreamWorks, and a lot of people, again, move around. So even amongst our films, a lot of the staff and a lot of the artists spend their time at lunch, talking, not just talking about work, but each of the, artists on the different productions share ideas and talk about their different films, which I think makes it a more, supportive and, just very, animation itself is a collaborative medium. So we like to think that the DreamWorks campus supports a lot of that.
Before we kind of go down a little bit more sort of the nitty gritty in terms of sort of day-to-day working and stuff, we've got this little piece about DreamWorks, which
Yeah, I brought a little piece that just actually has just a little smidge of our, historically our feature work, the things that we're doing in television, and just a few shots of our campus in Glendale that's so beautiful that if you haven't seen it, it's Justin came for a visit. It's a fun place to work.
Amazing, yeah. Let's play the clip.
My daughter always says to my husband when she comes to visit me, she says, "Dad, they never do anything over there. They never work."
Well, I think one of the kind of myths a lot of people used to have, I think certainly about kind of computer-generated animation, was that somehow the computer was magically doing all this work and therefore it was a lot easier. But in fact, in terms of the process, when you're making a film, you're still doing all the sort of things like storyboarding, character design, all those things you'll be doing with 2D. But in fact, you're then kind of creating models and having to sort of technically feed them in. So it's actually an incredibly lengthy process. Could you just tell us a little bit about that process?
It is that, I mean, there's some things that are going on, in parallel. But the basis for everything, as I said before, is a good story, and that starts with a script. And we start with, a couple of ways. We have filmmakers there, and we sometimes hear pitches on ideas. We have a team, including my partner, Murray Sori, and myself, and we, brainstorm ideas for, original ideas for movies. And then we have people that are helping us find books and, always kind of bringing in new ideas for projects, work with a lot of different types of writers, and just helping to, come up with ideas for, future movies and make the movies that we have better. So it starts with a good story in the script and filmmakers who have a vision for what they want to do. So we work closely with them. We have story, again, a lot of the initial parts are done, by hand. Now it's done by hand on a computer with a stylist. Even our fine artists are painting and stuff on a computer. But the end result looks just as spectacular as it is when they're just doing it by hand only. But we have character development, character design. We have set design. So all these things are sort of going on in parallel. And once those elements are agreed upon, then we have computer modelers who are taking those images, whether they be characters or sets, and redesigning them in the computer. And, the director would be looking at them all along. Then we have, casting, just like you do in live action. We work with a casting director who does a lot of work for DreamWorks Animation and DreamWorks Live Action. And we have, great, look for the right, casting for each of the roles. We have some very interesting projects that are coming up. Our next project is, I just mentioned, it's called Trolls. We have Anna Kendrick and Justin Timberlake's doing all the music for the movie. It's coming out in November. So our plan is to have an original and a sequel each year. And when Murray and I came on a year ago on the project, we had it planned out until 2018, ending with the number 3, the third How to Train Your Dragon film, which will come out at the end of, right now it's scheduled for the summer of 2018. So we're busy right now, it being 2016, making plans for the 2019 movies. We have a couple of scripts being written, and so we're always in animation trying to plan way ahead of the things that we're doing. But as I mentioned before, one of the steps I like the most in animation versus live action is that we early in the process edit our film together in a story reel. We may put our own voices with it to see, reading the characters, or sometimes we bring in the actors if we already have cast them, especially on a sequel. Jay Baruchel, who does the voice of Hiccup, is a favorite son, of course, of Canada, but so he'll come in and he may read the whole part of Hiccup, and then we have some of our animators or whatever read some of the other voices, but we quickly see on the screen what the movie's going to look like, and if it's we need it to be funnier or the pacing better or faster before we actually spend the most money, which it takes is the animation part. So that process is sort of ongoing, and then sometimes we record one of the actors, and then we record the other actors. And usually in animation, it's not at the same time, because in animation, you really can't afford to hold on to an actor for the length of the time that you are producing the movie. It's about it easily is 3 years. They have to do other things. You could never afford that. So we usually are getting the actors based on their availability, and it may not necessarily be together. So we may get a performance from Jay Baruchel, for example, and then we may, a month later get America Ferrara in to do Astrid in How to Train Your Dragon, and something America does may change what we need Jay to do. So we go back and forth and make these adjustments, all we hope for the betterment of the movie. And then there's, the animation part that takes it another step. When we are ready to buy off on it and we start feeding it into the animation, then you start getting some performance, and then we have a team that is working on just the lighting and the camera work. So all these elements have to come together in a way to make this process. It usually takes, once we're really in production, it takes about 18 months to actually animate and get it through what we call our pipeline.
And when you're actually then in the animating process, at that point is everything locked and it can't be changed? Or are you still changing things?
Not really, because again, it's such a process of discovery, and I think that's what us doing listen, feature animation in terms of we're trying to be conscientious of our budget, but we do have sort of the top of the line as far as that type of flexibility, and having a little bit of extra money and saving a little bit of extra money to have that flexibility as you discover the movie, I think makes them actually better. Because we all, sit there and watch the movie repeatedly and think, okay, how can we make it funnier? How can we make it more charming? Can we do a little bit more? Because if you do just a little bit more in that scene, we think that could make people cry and make people feel, really a part of it. So we try to make those adjustments within reason as we actually make the film.
So you're doing Dragons 3 right now.
We're just writing the script on Dragons 3.
So in that during that process, there's a point where obviously Dean, who directs and writes the films and is also from Canada, yes. He is bouncing ideas off you, or is he just going off and doing a script first, or how does it work? He
had there was a lot of conversations after we finished. First of all, when we finished How to Train Your Dragon, it's a little bit unusual. When we finished How to Train Your Dragon 1. We really didn't expect it to be, you never know, we didn't expect it to be as popular as it was. And at that time, right when the movie was coming out, Jeffrey Katzenberg went to Dean Deblois, who was one of the writer-directors on the first film, and said, I'm interested in doing a sequel. And Dean came back and said, well, I'm interested in a sequel, but I'm only interested in a sequel if I can I'm going to pitch you a trilogy, 3 movies that will really cover the sort of the story of Hiccup and Toothless and their sort of relationship over the coming of age of both of them. So he pitched this idea of the second and the third film, and we started on the second film. And as we were getting into the meat of the storytelling of the second film, we realized we had to actually one of the things that Jeffrey said that was fine, but he said each film has to be satisfying in and of itself. Because it's very difficult for us to put out sequels that as rapidly as, let's say, live action does. So each film has to land in and of itself and be a satisfying movie. So we ended up having to actually poach a few ideas from the third movie to actually make the second movie feel rich and fulfilling. So when we got to ready to do the third movie, Dean said, "Oh, this is a little bit thinner than I thought." And so we spent some time, and again, what I was saying, we talk with some of the other filmmakers that work with us, and sometimes we share ideas and say, Dean has some certain ideas, and then we share other ideas, and then he does, in fact, go off based on that, and comes up with some beats. Here's what I think I'm going to do, and writes a script, and then he brings it back to us, and we have, not only do he and I have conversations about it, but we have Jeffrey takes a read, and he has feedback. And
But even now, you're fundamentally changing things, aren't you?
well, we're sort of even discovering things now, which is a lot better time to discover it rather than once you all have it up and think we need to change something. But I think for this movie, for us in particular as the filmmakers, we want this movie to be the best of the three films in terms of satisfaction and emotion, and we just want to make sure we have it feel like it's got some spectacle, and it's got heart, and it's got humor, and we want to make this great. And it all starts with I can't say enough. It all starts with a good script.
I'm going to try and get some questions from the audience very shortly, but just one thing I touched on earlier was about this whole thing about, well, not just women in animation, but women in the industry in general. And one of the things, actually, one of your colleagues was saying earlier was about the fact that, can you remember what the percentage was in terms, you were saying the number of people who come out of animation
I think it's
schools and art schools?
70%.
So 70% of graduates coming out of art schools and animation schools are women, but 20% make up the workforce.
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah. So, I mean, there's a big disparity there. And I know that there are things that have been done to try and redress the balance. But what are your feelings on that? Is that something that's just going to naturally readjust, or are there positive things that people should be doing?
Well, I think kudos, and it's amazing that so many, there are so many women that are now, attempting to, there's some positions in animation that are just notoriously still largely men. Animation being one of them, story being another one of them. I'd say there were more women editors than what we've had before, so some of them are more. But, I think I've been a part of some conversations in Los Angeles amongst not just women in animation, but women in film and the Sundance Institute. We're all trying to sort of scratch our heads a little bit and try to figure out why is there that drop-off between the graduates and actually women in the industry. Some of it may have to do with, women's desire, dealing with the fact that women have to make a choice about families and, when they're going to do that and how they're going to do that. So that may be, that may factor into it. I think a lot of women, because it has been notoriously an all-male environment, I've heard feedback that a lot of women don't like working in that environment, that it's rough. It's a little more challenging when everybody that you work with on a daily basis are guys. It's just a different sensibility, and I think that's the next phase that we have to figure out and sort of overcome. But I'm sure there are a number of factors in it, but I like the fact that it's being spotlighted, and definitely at DreamWorks we have a lot of women in a lot of powerful positions, which I think is great. But I know for my business partner and I, Murray and I, it's very important to sort of look at some of these other, the artists and some of these other crew people that are working, and how can we encourage more women to get involved in not only some of the it's all artists, but some of the things like animation or story, but also some of the technical jobs, like, the technical directors, and how do we, attract those type of people to work in this, work in the business.
And how is the company now addressing some of the future kind of challenges that are coming up in terms of like the emerging markets like China and obviously Netflix and the way that people access content? Yeah.
Well, they're two different. Well, one is that we actually now have a studio in Shanghai, Oriental DreamWorks, that we're an investor in, and we're partnering with them creatively to create some films like Kung Fu Panda, which we did a all Mandarin version of the movie, which did really well there. We did a lot of the animation of the movie in China. And we're, we have set up a studio there, and we're, creating global projects that will be produced out of that studio as well. And I definitely think that's, a lot of the future is, it's at least the box office is going to be coming out of China. I think it surpassed the U.S. box office this past quarter. Just in terms of some of the things that are happening in terms of how people are seeing movies, I think that continues to be a challenge, because definitely a younger generation of kids are not watching, not only are they not going to movies, they're not even watching television. I mean, they're really watching everything on their phones and their pads. And I think it feels like what the film business, and that's not my area of complete expertise, but where we're still trying to figure out how to, monetize that for our industry and make it profitable for us, and make it work. There's still nothing better than actually going to a movie theater in my mind and seeing a good movie, and how do we get audiences to see those. And I think for the animation business, it's especially challenging since I'm just using Marvel as an example, but a lot of the Marvel films and some of the comic films, what I call them live action cartoons, are really sort of stepping on an area that used to be almost exclusively animation. These animated events, whether it was coming from Illumination or Disney or Pixar or us, were these big events, and we sort of had a segment of the market all to ourselves. But a lot of the kids that are now, we're part of sort of what I call our core audience, when presented with the option, will go see one of these other films first. And so we have to continue to, make good stories. I think there's still a market for that, but have an element of spectacle to it. And, that's becomes the challenge for us.
Is there anybody who'd like to ask Bonnie a question? If you'd like to raise your hand. Otherwise, I'll just keep on going. But, yes, there's a hand over there.
Hi, Bonnie. Thanks for coming. I have a question about story. When you're hearing a pitch for an animated feature, what part of the story makes you say, I want to make that movie? Because I read the Toy Story book, The Pixar Touch, about how the story changed from a journey of Buzz and Woody that was sort of dark to the much lighter final feature. So obviously the story that was pitched and greenlighted was different from what we saw. How do you navigate that world?
Well, I think, for me, I just have to speak for myself personally. For me, it's about the characters. I mean, that's what really initially appeals to me whenever I hear a pitch or read something or say, who are these characters? What kind of appeal might they have? And I think the other thing, but I also have to keep in mind, especially in my new position as, as an executive, what are the kind of things that the audiences are telling us they want to see? And I think, that the Toy Story thing, even though that was 20-something years ago, it's still a perfect example. They tend to look to these movies for, humor. Not only an interesting message and a good story, but they want to, I think, with all this stuff that ends up being super dark on some level, I think more and more families and kids want to find something they can feel completely safe and comfortable in, and definitely be challenged from a storytelling point of view, but also laugh and cry with their parents or their whoever they're coming to see the movie with.
Do you take unsolicited material, or do you have to find it yourself from DreamWorks?
No, we take pitches from the outside. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
No, we take pitches. Like I say, we're always looking for books, pitches, and we have a method to, be open for that kind of thing, for sure.
Okay. Yep, right at the very back.
Hi there. So in your last answer, you talked about how you want to make things that the audiences are telling you they want to see. And you also explained how your process before you even get to animation is really iterative. I'm wondering, how are the audiences telling you what they want to see? Do you ever do any screen testing with kids?
We do, where we actually test movies earlier. The good news is the people that work with us are sort of some of our best audiences, at least to start with. And like I say, we have at any time we have 5 or 6, projects going at one time. So we share with each other. We screen these rough versions for, different members of our crews and people to come in and take a look and give some feedback. And, the people that work in the animation we're our biggest fans. So, and a lot of them are parents and a lot of them have kids. And so they're very much attuned to that. So that's not the only way, but we actually have started doing a little bit of outside testing with outside audiences earlier than we have before. Only because audiences are first of all, our technique is way more sophisticated than it was. When we made Toy Story, we had our first, I won't get technical, but the first models that we call it layout, where you put the characters on the set and you have these rough camera moves and you start to get an idea. Buzz and Woody looked like 2 popsicle sticks and they just moved around the set like this. So if someone from the outside saw that, I doubt very much you could get a sense of what the story was going to be about unless you were inside. And even when you're inside, it was a struggle. But now we have a new process called pre-visualization, where we actually have models of rough models of the characters that we do the same thing with. We do these early camera moves. It's more about for camera, but if you actually have the models, you put the temp voices with them, you get a very good sense of what the movie is going to play like. And we do some early testing, and we're not really looking for numbers, but we're looking for how, kids respond, and do they get the basic story. And at least if you got that, then you can sort of build upon that. But that's an important part of our process.
Yep.
You mentioned here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yep.
So you mentioned before what you called a live-action cartoon, and how these movies are posing a threat to classic animation because they're drawing more attention in the box office.
Not so much. Well, you could do the threat, but I think healthy competition for
healthy
sure.
competition. But my question is, so stuff like the Marvel movies, or more recently, I just saw The Jungle Book over the weekend. These movies that blur the line between animation and live action. As someone who's worked in both animation and live action, do these kind of movies entice you?
I think it's very, obviously it's very appealing because, they draw you in. So more and more, I think someone was asking me when we take these pitches or we talk to these, more and more, I think we, as an animation studio, have to be asking ourselves, how do we distinguish ourselves? What makes your pitch or what makes this book idea or whatever feel like it's something that you could do in animation? In previously, not that long ago, we would always say animation should take you to a place that you can't go in live action. And more with all these different tools and techniques and technology, you can go just about anywhere in live action that you can go in animation. So we're actually always trying to figure out, where could we go, that feels different and it feels unique and, something that'll, like I say, just take you to a place that you feel like you may not be able to go in any other story. Maybe the lines are forever blurred. That's why you have so many people that are wanting to work in the medium and do these things that appeal, to these different audiences. We definitely have a lot of people that from live action. I mean, the cinematographer Roger Deakins worked very closely with us on the Dragon films in terms of his interest in what was the state of the art for the tech. We were always on the state of the art for technology and what was being done in terms of light and camera. And so we have him and Guillermo del Toro. We work with closely. Another one of your Canada boys, Jason Reitman, right now is writing a script for us. So he found a. No, I'm just saying that we were talking about these other ones that work with us. But Jason's doing a adaptation of a script for us from a children's book that he and his daughter love in particular. So it has to be something that again, filmmakers with a passion will find a way to do it.
Okay. Any final questions out there? Yep. Just over here.
I'm just looking at this list, which contains more than one of my all-time favorite films, and I'm just wondering, how do you, when you make a movie like Toy Story or something, and it gets such critical acclaim and it's at the top of the industry and everything, how do you push yourself to do better for the next one?
Well, I don't feel like I have to compete with myself in that way, but I do feel like for me, just and listen, you just don't know. You don't know when you first start on these exactly how they're going to turn out. But I feel like some of it was probably luck, but I also like to feel like maybe I was part of that luck in some way. And for me, it's about working with people that I just really I feel like I want to have some voice in how the process goes and what the creative process is, and just either the subject matter or appeals to me, or the people that I'm working with appeal to me, and they're people that I want to spend real time with, and I can't explain exactly how. I was telling Justin earlier, we were talking about some of the things that we were going to be talking about today, and I said some of these projects I feel like chose me, and some I chose them, but I don't know exactly. I like to think that there's always another bar to be set, but for me it's just really about, you work so many years and so hard on these that it's really about the day-to-day of it. And the day-to-day I'm very passionate about. I love my job. I love the people I work with. And I just want to keep doing it. And you just, you push for it to be as good as it can be.
Can I just ask you finally, in terms of the new roles, you've got this new role that's been created, it's you and Murray together. You're still producing Dragons 3, but you're also overseeing creatively the output of the studio in terms
That's
of
kind of
the feature
insane,
films.
isn't it?
Well, kind of, how is that working on a sort of day-to-day basis?
Well, I mean, the thing is, I just refused to give up Dragon 3. It was too much a part of my life, and I refused not to do the third one. So I've been, as of this coming summer, I'll have been part of the How to Train Your Dragon world for 10 years. It's hard to believe, but had to see the last one through. If I didn't have such an amazing creative team that have worked with me this whole time, there's no way I could do that. But really, my day-to-day job now involves a lot of overseeing all the other films that are happening. Like I say, it's in the scheme of things, it's 5 or 6 films, but they're big productions. Luckily, I have a partner in Murray, and we sort of split up the who's leading certain projects.
But each film has still got its own producer as well.
Yes, each film, we're definitely not the producer of those films, but we're sort of overseeing them and helping them. And actually, it's been, for me, it's been really like eye-opening. They were, all these other filmmakers were colleagues of mine at DreamWorks, but now that I'm sort of a little bit more in the trench with each of them, it's refreshing. I'm learning a lot from each of the shows. I feel like I can guide them a little bit, but also watch where they're going and try to, I like to say I'm trying to keep them from, getting a gutter ball. So if anything, I'm kind of the bumpers in the bowling alley. Go that way, but don't go too far that way. And it's fun and it's exciting too. I've worked with the people at DreamWorks now. I think I'm almost in 14 years, and it's hard to believe. It's gone so fast, but there's a lot of us who've been there for a lot of time, and we've worked on different projects together in various permutations. And Murray and I are committed to trying to help, and both of us had worked with Jeffrey before at DreamWorks, at Disney, even before we came to DreamWorks. So there's a lot, we're very much committed to the product and to the projects and to the place and to the people, and that's what makes it fun every day.
Before we say goodbye, we're going to play one final clip.
Just because I had to bring it.
And this is a really nice, so this is the teaser trailer from Dragons 2.
The first teaser from Dragon 2. And it was like the first animation that got done from the film, and it was very exciting because we got such an amazing response from the audience even before the movie was done.
So let's
So we'll go out on that. And then
we'll come back and say goodbye in a moment, but let's just roll that. Thank you.